each of us has the responsibility for setting policy and approach that each of our countries have. I'm not going to lecture another country on what they should do, nor will I have my positions determined by anyone outside of Canada. We listen to each other, we engaged robustly, and it is explicitly written in the communique that we respect President Trump.
Yeah, it took them till 3 in the morning to write that communique, so it was a difficult one. Justin Trudeau won't follow the lead of EU leaders in calling out Donald Trump and not committing to the Paris Accord on climate change. Trudeau met with the U.S. president in a sidebar yesterday in Italy. It's the two leaders' first face-to-face since Trump triggered the countdown to NAFTA renegotiations. But it was Trump's climate change policies that became the talk of the conference. We're back with the Sunday Scrum. With me again here on our Toronto set, Susan Riley and John Ibbotson, and Denise CLA joins me from Ottawa. Denise, let me start with you. No question, Trump is a wild card. What did you make of this G7 meeting?
It was quite something to observe, not only from the perspective of the bureaucrats and the diplomats looking in saying we don't even know what to expect, because we know that before heading into these meetings, the leaders, there is some degree of negotiation that has already happened, a consensus. But with Trump, again, wild card. And for Prime Minister Trudeau, he needed to bring up the climate change question, specifically around the Paris Agreement. And in that 30-minute conversation and that they had on the sidelines of the meeting, it didn't quite come out whether it had resonated. What we did see, though, in terms of the ultimate statement that was made, it was almost an afterthought, the climate change. So 6 versus 1, and I suppose in this case, President Trump won out on that because there was probably more concessions made to his agenda than it was to what I think Prime Minister Trudeau really needed to do when he was there as part of that meeting, to put climate change and the Paris Agreement firmly on the agenda and to get a resolution either way. John?
It is deeply depressing how much damage Donald Trump is doing to the Western Alliance. We can talk about the approach he took with the Sunni Arab nations, which is, you can argue that he was right to say, you guys can abandon all human rights concerns because we don't care what you do to your people, just so long as you band together to fight terrorism in Iran. That's a left-wing, right-wing argument. But there's no left or right-wing argument to having the President of the United States stand before NATO and question implicitly the commitment of the United States to the NATO alliance at a time when Russia is pushing at the eastern borders. There can be nothing but despair to have, I believe, the first time ever, a G7 communique in which the G7 cannot agree. We've had lots of disagreement in the G7, but you always find a way to paper it over. But Trump would not find it, was just not to be moved. And then finally, there was just a question of personality. Mm-hmm. He literally stepped on people. He was not spoken to by other leaders. The new president of France, Mr. Macron, deliberately snubbed him at one point. And there are plenty of stories about American defense officials and State Department officials quietly apologizing to their European counterparts in despair and saying, we are as upset with this man as you are. Donald Trump is shaking the foundations of the Western Alliance, and this is a very dangerous thing.
Susan.
Well, my view isn't quite as apocalyptic as John's is. I take some comfort in the fact that the other 6 nations were united in holding on to opposing positions from Trump. You know, he's a buffoon. He's an arrogant buffoon. He's an arrogant, forgetful buffoon. He at one point referred to Justin from Canada. I guess he couldn't remember his last name. These things are always, I think, emphasized or over-covered in the media almost. You know, we heard a lot about Trudeau's pull aside with Trump, and then we got this hilarious photograph of the two men surrounded by bushes, almost like a Sean Spicer shot, you know, conferring in like over a couple of minutes. Trudeau earnestly putting the case for free trade and against protectionism, and also earnestly putting the case for, you know, world action on global climate change. And Trump probably nodding vaguely because he agrees with whomever he's speaking with, and then going on and doing it. It's all pointless. In other words,
let me take a look at this and get you to take a look at this another way. The United States spends 4% of its GDP on military spending, more than anyone else. A lot of people say that the United States says it's tired of being the security blanket for others who don't pay their 2%. John, you say usually they find a way to paper over differences. Donald Trump always said he wanted to do things differently. Maybe papering over differences is not a good thing. Maybe it's good to see the divisions right out front and everybody can debate it. And the other issue, I wonder if, because during the campaign, Donald Trump had said very clearly that he was going to pull out of the Paris Accord agreement. And now he's putting it off and saying he will decide next week. There is still hope. So take that into account. Maybe all is not doom and gloom. John, you first.
Well, if Donald Trump had quietly decided that he was going to support the Paris Agreement, then he would have done it at the G7. He wouldn't have needed one more week to make up his mind. So I think that's a pretty strong signal that as soon as he gets back home, before his home constituency, he will withdraw from the Paris Accord, if only to distract attention from the incredible domestic scandals that are engulfing him.
Yeah, his son-in-law.
But so, you know, there is that. But there's, as I said, also just the question of trust. If the Europeans believe the United States is no longer a reliable ally, then they will look to their own resources. They will look for other allies. They might look to an accommodation with Russia. They might look more to China. The West cannot hold together unless the West is bound together by leadership of the United States. That's just a fact. Barack Obama said that the world needs more Canada and NATO needs more Canada. This is not a new position. What is a new position is to just threaten and bluster that if you don't get your way, you're going to crash an alliance that has, by the way, kept the world in the largest sense peaceful and in prosperity since the Second World War.
Okay.
Well, for me, what is really, really concerning is the uncertainty around what the Trump administration will do next. And maybe even less so his administration, but Trump specifically, where, again, the G7 meeting was the perfect opportunity for him to announce his position on climate change. We know that going into the G7 meeting, he had given notice to the NATO allies to say, look, you got to pay your fair share, the 2%. And he did that, I think, really very aggressively at those meetings. But coming out of that, it's this continued uncertainty that is making leaders around the globe very, very nervous. So today we're going to hear this from Trump. Tomorrow, when he gets back to the United States and he's, facing the lowest poll numbers of any presidential U.S. president in the history. But that's not Canada's concern. His poll numbers are not Canada's concern. Our concern is, can we effectively negotiate in good faith with the U.S. administration on major issues like NAFTA, climate change, and all of these other components?